The United States has a leadership crisis, and it's not just because President Joe Biden is mentally and physically deteriorating badly. It's also because the United States itself is intellectually deteriorating. Example, it's toxic identity politics. It's the great cultural cancer of our times, made in America. Now, this identity politics has created Vice President Kamala Harris, someone even worse than Biden, totally unfit to take over. She is someone who is picked not for their talent, but for two things above all: being black, being a woman. That is identity politics. And now the United States must pay for this intellectual idiocy, putting appearance above performance. Now, of course, the big fact here is that Biden is clearly struggling to now do his job. The man is so foggy-brained that he couldn't even read a speech on a teleprompter last week without reading the instructions as well to repeat a line. And then he mangled even that.
It is noteworthy that the percentage of women who register to vote and cast a ballot is consistently higher than the percentage of the men who do so. End of quote. Repeat the line.
Biden's decline is so obvious that even the left-wing newspapers that campaigned for him, like the New York Times, newspapers that hid his obvious defects because they hated Trump so much, they now report on what they used to hide. The New York Times, for instance, is reporting that Biden's team has had to schedule lots of rest for the 79-year-old. It says Biden now shuffles when he walks. His staff are scared he'll trip up. They're also scared he'll trip up when he opens his mouth, so they keep him away from press conferences. They've also had to clean up his dangerous gaffes, like when he claimed that US soldiers would be going into Ukraine. Now, it's getting to the point where Biden can't do his job properly. For instance, his trip to Saudi Arabia this Tuesday was supposed to happen last month, was supposed to be tacked on to the end of his swing through Europe. But Biden aides told the New York Times that, well, that idea was scrapped because one chief reason: Biden couldn't handle the trip that long. I mean, 10 days, too much for the old guy. Well, thank God then that the US isn't at war, needing a commander-in-chief who's on the job day in, day out. Now, American voters are noticing all this, of course, along with Biden's weak handling of the inflation explosion, the soaring petrol prices, all made worse, by the way, by his global warming policies against oil projects. And so, well, you can see it in the polls. The Rasmussen Report's presidential tracking poll this week had Biden's approval rate sinking to a fresh low, much worse than Donald Trump's in his first year and a half in the job. And there's a point in that. Biden's not even halfway through his 4-year term. And at this rate of decline, it's fair to ask, can he actually go the full distance? I mean, forget about all this talk, him running for a second term. I mean, that's obvious fantasy. The real question is whether he can finish this first term. And that puts the spotlight right on Kamala Harris and this idiotic identity politics that made her the vice president, made her the person who, under the Constitution, takes over if the president can't keep going. And that is America's real leadership nightmare. Now, when it comes to choosing Kamala Harris, look, it's true that every presidential candidate, when they're choosing their running mate, their vice president, they have politics on their mind. For instance, if they're strong in the north of the country, they want a running mate who's strong in the south. If they're of the right of the party, they wouldn't mind someone more on the left, consolation prize to sort of keep everyone happy, and so on. But in almost every case, the presidential candidates have at least chosen a running mate who could take over as president at a time like this. Most picked serious people to be vice president. John F. Kennedy. He thankfully chose the very wily Lyndon B. Johnson, who made a very fine president when Kennedy was assassinated. Ronald Reagan had George Bush Sr., a former CIA director, who later became president himself. George Bush Jr., he had Dick Cheney, a vastly experienced politician who was a huge influence in the Bush administration. And Barack Obama, well, he chose Joe Biden, back when Biden was closer to his prime. And to be fair to him, despite his shoddy judgment, he had decades of experience in the Senate. But what did Joe Biden do? He picked Kamala Harris.
Hold on. Slow down, everybody.
Kamala Harris, a former district attorney from California who'd been in the Senate for just 3 years and done nothing there to boast of. I mean, she pushed this fake Russian collusion story, that's about all. And from California, I mean, Biden was going to win that state anyway. So why did he pick Harris of all people? And the answer is this identity politics, this cancer. The Democrat left, the media left, they said, well, this white male, Joe Biden, he needed to run with a black woman to balance things, to balance the various identities now that identities count for so much. The pressure was quite strong, and Biden didn't resist, of course, is weak that way, and he narrowed his choice to 4 black women. And he picked the one who thought it'd be the least trouble. He also happened to pick the one who was probably the least competent and the least experienced in actually running things. And the weird thing, the sad thing, is that almost no one in the mainstream media bothered to ask, could Kamala Harris actually do the most important thing you'd expect from a vice president when the chips are down? To take over as president if the worst happened. And the answer is, almost certainly, she cannot. You just listen to her. Just listening to Kamala Harris is to realize that this is someone without a single profound insight. Someone who just babbles. For instance, here she is last week, trying to explain why the US Congress never got around to codifying abortion laws before the Supreme Court tossed out Roe versus Wade.
I think that, to be very honest with you, I do believe that we should have rightly believed, but we certainly believe that certain issues are just settled. Certain issues are just settled.
Clearly we're not.
No, that's right. And that's why I do believe that we are living, sadly, in real unsettled times.
Now, to that word salad, is very typical of her. And this one also from last week, when Harris went to Highland Park after a gunman shot dead 6 people at an Independence Day parade. A moment where she should be saying something quite serious, quite profound. She could only come up with this.
We'll deal with what we need to deal with in terms of also as we move forward, all agreeing that we got to be smarter as a country in terms of who has access to what, and in particular assault weapons. And we got to take this stuff seriously as you are, because you have been forced to have to take it seriously.
Harris has also failed completely at the one big job that President Biden gave her, to stop the illegal immigration over the US-Mexico border. Something that Harris claimed 13 months ago she'd been working on for ages, if you call this work.
I've been working on this issue for a very long time. I'm in Guatemala because my focus is dealing with the root causes of migration.
Push her and you just get the nervous giggle and the aggressive evasions of someone who clearly has no idea about taking responsibility.
Okay.
Do you have any plans to visit the border?
I'm here in Guatemala today. At some point, we are going to the border. We've been to the border. So this whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. And I don't understand the point that you're making.
And 13 months on, what has Harris actually achieved in this one job that Joe Biden gave her? Answer: absolutely nothing. In 1 month, we've just had nearly 250,000 illegal immigrants come over that border. Here's Texas Governor Greg Abbott on the weekend saying that under Biden and Harris, the illegal immigration had turned into an invasion.
It was just 2 years ago, we had the lowest number of people coming across the border and apprehensions under President Trump. And then President Biden took over and eliminated all of the policies that President Trump put in place. And it has led to this unprecedented, overwhelming number of people coming across the border. There's a record number of people coming across the border from more than 150 different countries across the entire globe. We're seeing over the 4th of July, for example, in just the Del Rio sector, which is only one of 5 sectors in the state of Texas, there were about 5,000 people either apprehended or who were gotaways.
The woman that Biden put in charge of that fiasco is also the woman who will take over from Biden if he can't go on as president. And this is not just an embarrassment. It's not just a scandal. It is a threat. Ideas have consequences. Bad ideas have bad consequences, and Kamala Harris is the proof. A country that plays identity politics is playing with disaster.